In the frozen winter of 1944, the war in Europe had reached a terrifying climax. The Allies had landed in Normandy, broken through the Atlantic Wall, and marched across France. But just when victory seemed within reach, Hitler struck back with one last desperate gamble. The Ardennes Offensive, remembered in history as the Battle of the Bulge. American soldiers suddenly found themselves staring down the barrels of Germany's most feared weapon of war, the Tiger tank. Its thick armor, nearly impervious to most Allied guns, and its deadly 88mm cannon, made it a monster of the battlefield. To many, it seemed unstoppable. For years, German tankers had dominated the armored war in Europe, from the early blitzkrieg campaigns in Poland and France to the titanic struggles on the Eastern Front. The Wehrmacht's panzers were legends, and among them, the Tiger was a name whispered with awe and fear. American Shermans, reliable and mass-produced, had rolled across the continent in huge numbers. But when a Sherman crew found itself face-to-face with a Tiger, survival often depended on luck, terrain, or sheer bravery. Most Sherman guns simply couldn't penetrate the Tiger's armor head-on. But what those German crews did not know was that America had quietly developed a weapon that could change everything. A tank so new, so secret, that it had barely arrived at the front when the bulge erupted. It was called the M26 Pershing. And unlike the Shermans, this machine carried something the Germans never expected to face from an American tank: a 90mm gun, capable of killing even a Tiger. The story of the Pershing begins long before its first duel with a German panzer. In fact, it begins in the frustrations of American tank crews who have been battling against superior German armor since North Africa. By 1942, U.S. forces were learning hard lessons. In Tunisia, American Shermans first encountered the German Panzer IVs with long barrel guns, and soon after, the dreaded WWII. Reports came back of shells bouncing uselessly off the German giants. Crews spoke of watching their rounds spark and ricochet, while the Tigers calmly turned their turrets and fired back, their shells tearing through Sherman armor like paper. Back in Washington, the Ordnance Department had been pushing for a heavier American tank since before the landings in Europe. Engineers and designers knew that sooner or later they would face German machines too powerful for Sherman. But the U.S. Army had its own philosophy. Rather than building heavy tanks like the Germans, the Americans believed speed, reliability, and numbers were more important. Shermans could be shipped easily, repaired quickly, and produced by the tens of thousands. The doctrine held that tanks weren't supposed to fight other tanks head-to-head. That was the job of specialized tank destroyers. But reality on the battlefield was far different. In practice, Shermans fought panzers every day and paid the price. The Ordnance Department's answer was the T-26 project, a new design that would eventually become the M26 Pershing. It featured thick frontal armor, wider tracks for stability, and most importantly, the powerful 90mm M3 gun, a weapon originally designed for anti-aircraft duty. This gun could fire high-velocity shells with enough force to punch through even the frontal armor of a Tiger. The challenge wasn't building it. The challenge was convincing the Army to accept it. General George S. Patton himself was skeptical of heavy tanks, arguing that mobility mattered more. But by late 1944, as losses mounted and Tiger sightings spread fear among Allied ranks, the pressure grew too strong to ignore. Tank crews needed something to level the battlefield. The Pershing was rushed into limited production. Only a small number would make it across the Atlantic in time to see combat before the war's end. When the Pershings finally arrived in Europe, they were shrouded in secrecy. Crews were hurriedly trained, their tanks painted over, and orders given with urgency. Few outside those units even knew the new weapon existed. To the Germans, American armor was still the same as it had always been. Swarms of Shermans, dangerous in numbers but no match for a Tiger in a duel. The thought that an American tank could now meet them head-on and win was unthinkable. Imagine the battlefield then. The snow-covered forests of Belgium, villages reduced to rubble, the thunder of artillery echoing through the Ardennes. German tankers sat in their Tigers, confident as ever. For years, they had been the hunters, prowling the fields and blasting enemy tanks before they could even scratch their armor. But just beyond the smoke and ruins, a new predator was moving into position. The Pershing, Its long 90mm gun jutting forward like a spear was about to enter the fight. To the American crews who first climbed inside the Pershing, the difference was immediate. The armor felt solid, the gun reassuring. No longer would they have to rely on outflanking maneuvers or desperate ambushes. For the first time, they had a weapon that could meet the German big cats on equal terms. Yet they were nervous too. This was an untested machine, rushed from the factory floor into the heart of battle. No one knew if it would truly deliver. What followed would become legendary among those who witnessed it. The first duels between Pershings and Tigers. The outcome would shock the German tankers, who had no idea what they were facing. To them, the silhouette looked vaguely like another Sherman, perhaps a newer model. But when that first 90mm round slammed into a Tiger and tore through its armor, everything changed. The hunters had just become the hunted. And so, as the final winter of the war dragged on, a new chapter in armored warfare began. The Pershing was not produced in time to change the war's overall course. The Allies still relied overwhelmingly on the Sherman. But for the men who faced the Tigers, the arrival of the Pershing was a lifeline, a chance to fight on more equal terms, and proof that American industry could answer even the fiercest challenge. This is a story of how the Pershing entered the war and how German tankers, so used to dominance, suddenly realized that the battlefield had changed. They never knew the Americans had a gun that could kill their Tigers, until it was too late. The first recorded appearance of the Pershing in combat came in the final months of the war. It was February 1945, when units of the U.S. 3rd and 9th Armored Divisions received their new machines and rolled toward the German border. To the tank crews who had spent months inside Shermans, climbing into the Pershing felt like stepping into the future. Its suspension rode more smoothly. Its armor plate seemed thick and protective, and the sheer size of its 90mm gun inspired a new kind of confidence. But confidence alone wasn't enough. What mattered now was whether this tank could deliver under fire. The German army still fought with ferocity, especially along the Siegfried Line, a vast network of bunkers, dragon's teeth, and fortified villages. Here, the Tiger and its even more terrifying cousin, the Tiger II, known as the King Tiger, were committed to halting the Allied advance. American soldiers had heard the stories, tales of Shermans destroyed at over a mile's distance, of Tiger shells punching through multiple vehicles a row, of desperate ambushes where entire platoons of Shermans were sacrificed just to knock out a single Tiger. Facing such monsters with Sherman felt like charging a fortress armed only with a rifle. But then came the Pershing's first true test, Cologne. By early March, the Allies had pushed into the ancient city, determined to cross the Rhine River and open the way into the German heartland. The streets were choked with rubble, the air thick with smoke. Snipers lurked in ruined buildings, artillery echoed in the distance, and German armor still prowled among the ruins. It was in this shattered city that the Pershing's legend was born. As American troops advanced through Cologne, a Tiger waited at an intersection, guarding the approach to the cathedral. The Tiger had been king of such urban duels for years. Its crew was confident. No Sherman could possibly penetrate their armor frontally. They had destroyed dozens in past battles, and this would be no different. Then, around the corner, rolled a tank that looked larger than usual, its gun longer, its stance heavier. At first, the Germans likely assumed it was a modified Sherman, but the truth was about to become clear. The Pershing's crew spotted the Tiger. The gunner adjusted his sights. The loader rammed a shell into the breech, and with a deafening crack, the first 90mm round screamed across the square. The impact shook the Tiger. Its armor pierced clean through. Flames erupted. In seconds, the Tiger that had once ruled the battlefield was burning in the shadow of Cologne Cathedral. German tankers had just learned that their greatest advantage was gone. This moment was caught on film by a U.S. Army cameraman, and the footage remains one of the most famous tank duels of the Second World War. For the first time, the world could see that the feared Tiger was not invincible. The Pershing had proven itself in the harshest possible way, face to face, in a duel to the death. But Cologne was not the only place where the Pershing showed its worth. Across Germany, in the spring of 1945, more engagements took place. In Elsdorf, Pershings fought against Panther tanks. In one clash, A Pershing destroyed a Panther with just 2 well-placed shots. In another, a Pershing crew managed to knock out multiple German vehicles in a matter of minutes. For the Americans, these victories were more than tactical wins. They were a psychological shift. No longer did they have to fear every Tiger encounter as a hopeless struggle. Now, they had a machine that could punch back with equal force. The 90mm gun was the Pershing's soul. Originally an anti-aircraft weapon, it had the velocity and power to rip through German armor. Unlike the 75mm Sherman guns, which often bounced off Tiger fronts, the 90 could pierce from long range. Even the King Tiger, with its monstrous armor, was not entirely safe. At the right distance, with the right angle, the Pershing could deliver a killing blow. German tankers, accustomed to leisurely destroying Shermans at will, suddenly found themselves under real threat. It is important to remember, though, that only about 20 Pershings reached the front in time for combat. The vast majority of American armor remained Shermans, and they still bore the brunt of the fighting. In truth, the Pershing arrived too late, and in too small numbers to influence the war's overall outcome. But for the crews lucky enough to drive them, it was a revelation. Veterans spoke of the morale boost the Pershing brought, how it gave them hope when they might otherwise have despaired against the iron beast of the Reich. The Germans, for their part, were taken completely by surprise. Their intelligence services had not prepared them for an American heavy tank armed with such a weapon. Many assumed the Pershings were merely upgunned Shermans, until they saw what the 90mm could do. Imagine the shock of a Tiger crew, confident in their armor, suddenly realizing that their once impenetrable fortress could be breached with ease. For years, German propaganda had hailed the Tiger as unstoppable, a weapon that could dominate any battlefield. Now, with each duel lost, that myth was crumbling. And yet, the Pershing itself was not without flaws. It was heavier than the Sherman, slower, and mechanically less reliable. Its rushed development meant teething problems in the field. Broken transmissions, engine troubles, difficulties in transport across muddy terrain. Some commanders worried it was too late to perfect, but none of that could erase its battlefield achievements. The Pershing represented what American armor could have been had it been introduced earlier. Many historians still debate whether, had the Pershing been deployed in 1943 or 1944 in greater numbers, the balance of armored warfare might have shifted more dramatically. Interesting facts surround the Pershing's short career in World War II. It was named after General John J. Pershing, commander of the American Expeditionary Forces in World War I. Its design lineage would later influence the post-war M46, M47, and M48 tanks, and eventually the mighty M60 that served throughout the Cold War. In many ways, the Pershing was the bridge between the mass-produced wartime Sherman and the modern American-made battle tanks that followed. There is also the little-known story of how the Pershing almost didn't make it to Europe at all. Bureaucratic resistance within the Army nearly killed the project. Only after General Eisenhower himself demanded heavier tanks did the program gain momentum. And even then, shipping space across the Atlantic was precious, with planes, fuel, and ammunition competing for every ton. Pershings were loaded in secret, rushed to the docks, and sent across the ocean in a race against time. Some didn't even arrive until April 1945, just weeks before Germany's surrender. For the German tankers who first encountered them, the shock was profound. They had spent years in dominance, confident that their Tigers and Panthers were superior to anything the Allies could field. And suddenly, here was a machine that could destroy them head-on. Many crews never lived to report what they had seen. For those who did, their warnings came too late. By the spring of 1945, the Reich was collapsing. The duels between Pershings and Tigers remained some of the most dramatic tank encounters of the war. They were not just clashes of steel, but of ideas. Germany's doctrine of fewer, heavier tanks versus America's strategy of mobility and mass production. In the end, numbers still mattered. The Pershings were too few to dominate, but their presence proved that America could meet German engineering with equal might when it chose to. And yet, one haunting question lingers. What if the Pershing had been ready a year earlier in Normandy, when Shermans fought desperately against Panthers in the hedgerows, or in the Ardennes, where Tigers devastated American lines? How many lives might have been saved? How many battles won more swiftly? Had the 90mm gun arrived sooner? That question still echoes through the history of armored warfare, a reminder of how timing can decide the fate of nations. The spring of 1945 was the dying breath of the Third Reich. German cities lay in ruins, the Red Army surging from the east, and the Western Allies pressed relentlessly from the west. Yet, even as Germany's collapse seemed certain, the battlefields remained deadly. The Tigers, Panthers, and King Tigers, still prowling in reduced numbers, were far from harmless. Every street corner, every village, every river crossing held the possibility of one last ambush. For American crews who finally had Pershings at their command, the closing battles of the war carried a different atmosphere. They no longer felt helpless when reports of Tigers reached their ears. Instead, they felt the anticipation of Duel, of finally being able to strike back with equal force. The 90mm gun gave them the edge they had been praying for since Tunisia. And now, as the war entered its final act, those duels became a symbol of how much had changed. One of the most famous showdowns took place in the town of Elsdorf. A German Panther waited in ambush, its long 75mm gun capable of punching through Shermans at lethal ranges. For years, such an encounter would have been predictable. The Sherman would burn, and the Panther would continue hunting. But this time, a Pershing rolled into sight. Both crews spotted each other almost simultaneously. The Panther fired first, its shell slamming into the Pershing's frontal armor with a deafening clang. The crew held their breath. The armor had held. In response, the Pershing's gun roared. One shot, then another, and the Panther was silenced, smoke pouring from its wreck. To the Americans watching, it was vindication. For too long, they had paid in blood against German armor. Now, for once, the exchange went the other way. The hunter had been hunted, and it was the German crew that never walked away. Word of these victories spread quickly, whispered from unit to unit. A tank that could face a Panther or Tiger head-on. It seemed almost too good to be true. But there was also tragedy. Not every duel ended in glory. In Elsdorf, another Pershing was caught off guard and destroyed, its crew lost in the flames. For all its power, the Pershing was not invincible. Against the King Tiger, especially, battles remained uncertain. The King Tiger's armor was so thick that even the 90mm gun struggled to penetrate at long range. American crews learned quickly that tactics still mattered. Position, flanking, and the element of surprise could make the difference between survival and destruction. Still, the Pershing represented hope. In Cologne, Elsdorf, and across the German frontier, it changed the equation. Where once American soldiers had dreaded the sight of Tigers, now they believed they could prevail. For the Germans, this shift was devastating. Their tank crews, once so confident, now faced opponents who no longer feared them. And in war, morale can be as deadly as any weapon. Beyond the battlefield, the Pershing carried larger meaning. It was a glimpse of what the future of armored warfare would look like. The Second World War had shown that tanks were no longer just tools of breakthrough. They were the centerpiece of modern armies. The days of light armor and weak guns were over. Survivability, firepower, and balanced design would define the post-war era. And the Pershing, though rushed and imperfect, was America's first step into that new age. The irony, of course, is that the Pershing arrived too late to shape the war's outcome. By the time it engaged in duels with Tigers and Panthers, the Reich was already collapsing. Hitler's armies were outnumbered, their fuel supplies dwindling, their skies dominated by Allied aircraft. No tank, however fearsome, could change the end that was coming. Yet, for the men who faced those final battles, the Pershing mattered deeply. It gave them a chance to fight on equal terms, to strike back against machines that had once seemed immortal. The Germans never fully grasped what they were up against. For years, they had dismissed American tanks as inferior, reliable but weak, mass-produced machines that could overwhelm in numbers but never in quality. And suddenly, in the rubble of Cologne, in the streets of Elsdorf, they learned otherwise. The 90mm gun was not a weapon they expected. Many never lived to tell the tale. Those who did reported strange new American tanks that looked like Shermans but carried a terrifying sting. By then, It was far too late to matter. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, only around 20 Pershings had actually seen combat, but their impact lingered. Army planners immediately recognized that this was the future, not the past. Within months, the Pershing was upgraded and redesignated as the M26, beginning a new lineage of tanks that would dominate the Cold War. From Korea to Vietnam, from Europe to the Middle East, the descendants of the Pershing would continue to fight for decades. The Tiger, on the other hand, faded into legend. It had been feared, respected, even mythologized, but its time was over. In museums and war stories, the Tiger became a symbol of German engineering and battlefield dominance. Yet, its end came not just from the overwhelming numbers of Shermans, but from the unexpected arrival of an American heavy tank that shattered the myth of invincibility. In many ways, the story of the Pershing and its duels with the Tiger is less about machines and more about timing. The Pershing was proof that America could match German armor, but it came in the twilight of the war, when the outcome was already decided. Had it arrived earlier, at Normandy, or in the Ardennes, perhaps countless lives might have been saved, countless battles shortened. It stands as a reminder that in war, delays and decisions at the top can echo in blood on the battlefield. And so, the final irony, the Pershing's greatest achievement was not in the number of tanks it destroyed, but in what it represented. To American crews, it was hope. To German tankers, it was fear. To historians, it was a bridge between one era and the next. When that first 90mm shell pierced the armor of a Tiger in Cologne, it was more than a battlefield victory. It was the end of an illusion. The Tiger was no longer untouchable. As the war ended and peace returned to Europe, the Pershings were quietly shipped back, some to training grounds, others to scrapyards. The world moved on, but their brief appearance in history left an indelible mark. In the ruins of Germany, amid the wrecks of Tigers and Panthers, the message was clear. The age of German dominance in tank warfare was finished.